All right, so picture this. You're a Roman emperor at the height of the empire's power.
Ruling over millions, from the Scottish Highlands to the sands of North Africa.
Exactly. And that was the reality for the Julio-Claudian dynasty, the first 5 Roman emperors.
A dynasty known as much for its drama and intrigue as for its expansion of the empire.
It's a story full of twists and turns, larger-than-life personalities, and moments of both incredible triumph and shocking brutality. And that's what we'll be exploring in this deep dive, right?
Absolutely. It's like stepping into a real-life soap opera, but with, togas and gladiators.
Now, what makes this deep dive even more fascinating is that we get to experience it through the eyes of some truly remarkable historians. We have Suetonius, who's known for his, well, let's just say his love of juicy gossip and scandalous anecdotes.
He doesn't hold back, that's for sure.
Not at all. And then we have Tacitus, who offers a much darker, more cynical view of these emperors. He lived through this period, saw the inner workings of the empire, and his perspective is, well, it's pretty bleak.
Yeah, he definitely saw the flaws in the system and in the people running it.
What I find so interesting is how these contrasting perspectives, Suetonius with his gossip and Tacitus with his cynicism, give us a richer, more nuanced understanding of this era.
It's like getting two sides of the same coin, right?
Yeah.
You need both to see the full picture.
Exactly. It's not just about memorizing names and dates. It's about understanding the human drama behind it all. The motivations, the pressures, the fears that shape these individuals and ultimately influence the course of history. And it all starts with Augustus, the first emperor, who really set the stage for what was to come.
Oh, he was a master strategist. He managed to transform Rome from a republic to an empire without anyone really noticing what he was doing.
He was a bit of a magician, wasn't he? How did he manage to pull that off?
Well, he was very clever. He understood the importance of appearances, of making it seem like things were staying the same, even as he was consolidating his power. He kept the Senate around, held elections, but he made sure that he was the one calling the shots behind the scenes. Plus, he brought an end to years of civil war, ushering in an era of peace and prosperity known as the Pax Romana.
Ah, yes, the Pax Romana. For those who might not be familiar, can you quickly explain what that was and why it was so significant?
Sure. The Pax Romana, meaning Roman peace, was a period of roughly 2 centuries where the Roman Empire experienced incredible stability and expansion. Augustus set the foundation for this by securing the borders, reforming the army, and creating a system of governance that, while autocratic, was relatively efficient. It was a golden age in many ways, with a flourishing of art, literature, architecture, and trade. But, and this is important, this peace came at a cost. Maintaining control over such a vast empire often involved military force, keeping those borders secure and also suppressing any dissent.
It was a time of peace and prosperity, but also, let's say, firm control.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting with the Julio-Claudians. Augustus created this incredibly powerful position, the emperor, but he never really figured out how to make the transition of power smooth. There were no clear rules of succession, no established way to choose the next emperor.
So each new emperor basically had to fight for his spot. I can only imagine the power struggles that caused.
Oh, it was intense. Imagine being born into this family, constantly looking over your shoulder, never knowing who to trust. Talk about pressure. It was a breeding ground for suspicion and paranoia, and as we'll see, things often turned quite violent.
Before we dive into the individual emperors and all that drama, I want to hear more about these historians who documented it all. We've mentioned Suetonius, who seems to have had a knack for uncovering, shall we say, the less flattering details. What makes his work so compelling, even if we have to be a bit skeptical of some of his claims?
Well, Suetonius is a bit like the original tabloid journalist. He was writing decades after these events, so he had access to a lot of rumors and hearsay, and frankly, he seemed to relish the more salacious stories. But what makes him so valuable is that he gives us a glimpse into how these emperors were perceived by the Roman people, the whispers that surrounded them, the kind of gossip that people were spreading.
So it's like reading the ancient Roman equivalent of a gossip magazine.
Exactly. And then we have Tacitus, who paints a very different picture. He was actually alive during this period, saw the inner workings of the empire, and his perspective is much more, well, jaded. He saw the Julio-Claudians as a symptom of Rome's decline. He believed that absolute power corrupts.
He doesn't sugarcoat anything, does he?
Nope. He's a brilliant writer, incredibly insightful, but his view of this dynasty is far from positive.
So we have Suetonius, the gossip monger, and Tacitus, the skeptic. Two very different perspectives, but both crucial for piecing together a complete picture of this era. Now, I think it's time to meet the players, starting with Tiberius, the reluctant emperor. He was Augustus's stepson, a skilled military commander, but it seems he wasn't exactly thrilled about taking on the top job.
Tiberius is an interesting figure, very complex. He seemed to yearn for the days of the Republic, when power was shared, not concentrated in one man. He was capable, yes, but also deeply suspicious, prone to isolation, and always kind of living in the shadow of Augustus.
So was he a tyrant, as some historians have portrayed him, or more of a tragic figure, someone trapped by circumstance?
That's a question that has been debated for centuries. Some historians believe that the more negative stories about him, the rumors of cruelty and debauchery, were spread by his enemies to discredit him. Others argue that those stories, while maybe exaggerated, do reflect a man who was deeply unhappy in his role, burdened by the immense weight of leading an empire.
It's amazing how, even after all these years, we're still trying to figure out who Tiberius really was.
And that's what makes history so fascinating, right? It's not about finding simple answers. It's about exploring the nuances, the complexities, the human stories behind the events.
And with the Julio-Claudians, oh boy, are there stories to tell.
We're just getting started. Buckle up. Welcome back to our deep dive into the Julio-Claudian dynasty.
Now, we've talked a lot about the emperors themselves, the power struggles, the drama at the top, but I'm curious about what life was like for the average Roman citizen during this era. What was it like living under these emperors?
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the stories of the emperors, but their decisions had a huge impact on millions of people. For the average Roman, life under the Julio-Claudians was, well, it was complicated. On one hand, you had the Pax Romana, which meant stability, prosperity, trade flourished, cities grew, and there weren't constant wars disrupting everyday life.
So on the surface, things were pretty good.
Right, but that peace was maintained with a pretty firm hand. Don't forget, these emperors had absolute power, and they weren't afraid to use it to squash any opposition.
We talked about the paranoia within the imperial family, but it sounds like that same atmosphere extended to the rest of Roman society.
Oh, absolutely. There was a whole system of informers who were rewarded for reporting on anyone suspected of disloyalty. Even just a casual comment could get you in trouble if the wrong person overheard.
So there was peace, but also this underlying current of fear and uncertainty.
Exactly. And then you had this whole other layer, the spectacle of the imperial court. The emperor's lives were like a constant public performance. Their families, scandals, their lavish lifestyles, it was all on display.
It's funny how some things never change, right? This obsession with celebrity and scandal has been around for centuries.
Oh, for sure. The Romans were obsessed with their emperors, their fashion, their love affairs, their public appearances, everything. And the emperors knew it. They often played up to that attention.
Speaking of playing to the crowd, that brings us to Caligula, probably the most notorious of the Julio-Claudian emperors. He really takes the crown when it comes to outrageous behavior. Was he truly mad, as some historians claim, or was it all just an act?
It's tough to say for certain. The stories about Caligula are so wild. I mean, did he really make his horse a senator? Did he really send his army to collect seashells? Who knows? But it's clear he was a troubled individual. Maybe the power went to his head, or maybe he was just, really eccentric.
It sounds like his reign really embodied those Roman anxieties about unchecked power that we talked about earlier. What was it like for the average person living under Caligula?
Imagine living with a ruler whose mood could change on a dime. One day he's showering people with gifts and throwing lavish parties. The next day he's executing people left and right. It must have been terrifying, never knowing what to expect.
Like a ticking time bomb.
Exactly. And that's actually an interesting point about Caligula. Even though his reign was short and chaotic, it really shaped how Romans viewed imperial power. He became a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when power goes unchecked.
So in a way, he paved the way for his successors to rule with maybe a bit more restraint.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. After Caligula, the bar was pretty low. When his uncle Claudius came to power, people were just relieved to have someone relatively stable in charge.
Claudius is another interesting one. He was often underestimated, right? More of a scholar than a politician. But he turned out to be a pretty effective ruler.
He was. Claudius had spent his life observing the machinations of the imperial court. He knew how dangerous it could be, he understood the power dynamics, and when he became emperor, he used that knowledge to his advantage. He was a shrewd administrator, expanded the empire, implemented important reforms.
So he was more of a behind-the-scenes operator than a charismatic leader like Augustus.
Exactly. He wasn't flashy, but he got things done. And his reign shows that even within this chaotic dynasty, there were periods of stability and progress. He had his flaws, sure, but compared to Caligula, he seemed like a model of reason.
And then we have Nero, the last emperor of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. He's known for his extravagance, his love of the arts, and of course the great fire that destroyed much of Rome.
Nero is a complex figure. He was an artist at heart, he loved music, poetry, theater, and he craved the spotlight. And that definitely influenced his rule. He built these massive palaces, hosted lavish games, even performed on stage himself.
He was basically a rock star emperor, living life on his own terms. But his reign, like so many others in this dynasty, ended in tragedy. What led to his downfall?
It was a combination of things, really. His extravagance and his increasingly erratic behavior alienated a lot of powerful people. There were rumors of conspiracies and rebellions, and eventually the Senate declared him a public enemy. Faced with certain death, he chose to end his own life, supposedly saying, "What an artist dies in me."
It's a dramatic end to a dramatic life. It seems like these emperors, even with all their power and wealth, were ultimately trapped by their own ambitions and insecurities.
I think that's a great point. The Julio-Claudians achieved so much, but they were also deeply flawed individuals. They were products of their time, raised in a culture that valued power and ambition above all else. And their story reminds us that even those who seem to have it all can be consumed by their own demons.
We've covered a lot of ground in our exploration of the Julio-Claudian dynasty,
From the rise of Augustus to the dramatic downfall of Nero.
and we've seen how their reigns impacted the lives of everyday Romans.
But now I think it's time to zoom out a bit and consider their lasting impact on history. What did their rule mean for Rome and for the Western world?
It's pretty amazing to think that this one family, who ruled for less than a century, left such a mark on civilization.
You're right, their influence is still felt today. Think about it, when we picture the Roman Empire, a lot of the images that come to mind are directly tied to the Julio-Claudians.
The Colosseum, aqueducts, roads stretching across Europe.
Exactly. Those achievements are a big part of their legacy. Augustus, with his Pax Romana and his savvy political skills, really set the stage for Rome's dominance. He created a blueprint for imperial rule that many leaders after him tried to follow.
And it wasn't just about politics. This dynasty oversaw a huge flourishing of culture and architecture. We still marvel at the structures they built, the engineering skills it took to create them.
Absolutely. And those structures weren't just practical, they were symbols of Roman power and innovation. They helped to unify this vast empire, sending a clear message. Rome is here, and Rome is here to stay.
They were master builders in every sense of the word.
Right. But of course, no legacy is simple. We can't talk about their achievements without also acknowledging the darker aspects of their rule.
Right, the peace and prosperity came at a cost. There was a lot of brutality, a lot of suppression of anyone who challenged their authority.
Absolutely. Their reigns were full of paranoia, intrigue, violence, both within the family and across the empire. The Julio-Claudians showed the world both the potential and the perils of absolute power.
It's a double-edged sword, for sure. On one hand, you have these incredible accomplishments, the expansion of Rome's influence. On the other hand, you have the shadow of tyranny, the stifling of dissent.
And that tension, that duality, is something that has resonated throughout history. The Julio-Claudians became a sort of case study for rulers who came after them. They provided a model for building an empire, but also a warning about the dangers of unchecked ambition.
Their story reminds us that power, no matter how grand, always has a price. And it makes us think about the choices we make as a society. How much are we willing to sacrifice for security and stability?
That's such a crucial question, and it's one that we still grapple with today. How do we balance individual freedom with collective security? Where do we draw the line when it comes to government power? The Julio-Claudians offer a powerful lens through which to view these enduring dilemmas.
It's fascinating how these figures from so long ago can still speak to us today. Their story reminds us that history isn't just about dates and names, it's about understanding human nature, the complexities of power, and the choices we face as individuals and as societies.
Exactly. And I hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity to learn more about this era and the impact it continues to have. There's so much more to explore: the lives of women in the imperial court, the influence of the Julio-Claudians on art and religion, the stories of ordinary people who lived through these times.
We've only scratched the surface here, but hopefully we've given you a starting point, a taste of the intrigue and complexity of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. So keep digging, keep questioning, and keep exploring the past. It's full of surprises, insights, and connections that resonate with us even today. And until next time, may your deep dive be full of wonder and discovery.